Chapter 22. Classes of Concepts. In the preceding chapter we have seen the process of conception, of the forming of concepts. The idea of a general class of things or qualities is a concept. Each concept contains the qualities which are common to all the individuals composing the class, but not those qualities which pertain only to the minor classes or the individuals. For instance, the concept of bird will necessarily include the common qualities of warm-bloodedness, featheredness, wingedness, oviparousness, and vertebrateness, but it will not include colour, special shape, size, or special features or characteristics of the subfamilies or individuals composing the great class. The class comprises the individuals and subclasses composing it. The concept includes the general and common qualities which all in the class possess. A percept is the mental image of a particular thing. A concept is the mental idea of the general qualities of a class of things. A percept arises from the perception of a sensation. A concept is a purely mental, abstract creation whose only existence is in the world of ideas, and which has no corresponding individual object in the world of sense. There are two general classes of concepts, namely, 1. Concrete concepts, in which the common qualities of a class of things are combined into one conceptual idea, such as bird, of which we have spoken. 2. Abstract concepts, in which is combined the idea of some quality common to a number of things, such as sweetness or redness. Jevons's well-known rule for terms is an aid in remembering this classification. A concrete term is the name of a thing. An abstract term is the name of a quality of a thing. It is a peculiar fact and rule of concrete concepts that 1. The larger the class of things embraced in a concept, the smaller are its general qualities, and 2. The larger the number of general qualities included in a concept, the smaller the number of individuals embraced by it. For instance, the term bird embraces a great number of individuals, all the birds that are in existence, in fact, but it has but few general qualities, as we have seen. On the contrary, the concept stork has a much larger number of general qualities, but embraces far fewer individuals. Finally, the individual is reached, and we find that it has more qualities than any class can have, but it is composed of the smallest possible number of individuals, 1. The secret is this: no two individuals can have as many qualities in common as each has individually, unless they are precisely alike, which is impossible in nature. Imperfect concepts. It is said that outside of strictly scientific definitions, very few persons agree in their concepts of the same thing. Each has his or her own concept of the particular thing which he or she expresses by the same term. A number of persons asked to define a common term, like love, religion, faith, belief, etc., will give such a variety of answers as to cause wonderment. As Green says, "My idea or image is mine alone, the reward of careless observation if imperfect, of attentive, careful, and varied observation if correct. Between mine and yours a great gulf is fixed. No man can pass from mine to yours, or from yours to mine. Neither in any proper sense of the term can mine be conveyed to you. Words do not convey thoughts. They are not vehicles of thoughts in any true sense of that term. A word is simply a common symbol which each associates with his own idea or image." The reason of the difference in the concepts of several persons is that very few of our concepts are nearly perfect. The majority of them are quite imperfect and incomplete. Jevons gives us an idea of this in his remarks on classification. Things may seem to be very like each other which are not so. Whales, porpoises, seals, and several other animals live in the sea exactly like a fish. They have a similar shape and are usually classed among fish. people are said to go whale fishing. But these animals are not really fish at all, but are much more like dogs and horses and other quadrupeds than they are like fish. They cannot live entirely under water and breathe the air contained in the water like fish, but they have to come to the surface at intervals to take breath. Similarly, we must not class bats with birds because they fly about, although they have what would be called wings. These wings are not like those of birds, and in truth bats are much more like rats and mice than they are like birds. Botanists used at one time to classify plants according to their size as trees, shrubs, or herbs, but we now know that a great tree is often more similar in character to a tiny herb than it is to other great trees. A daisy has very little resemblance to the great Scotch thistle, yet the botanist regards them as very similar. The lofty growing bamboo is a kind of grass, and the sugar cane also belongs to the same class with wheat and oats. It is a matter of importance that clear concepts should be formed regarding at least the familiar things of life. The list of clear concepts should be added to from time to time by study, investigation, and examination. The dictionary should be consulted frequently, and a term studied until one has a clear meaning of the concept the term seeks to express. A good encyclopedia, not necessarily an expensive one in these days of cheap editions, will also prove very useful in this respect. As Halleck says, it must be borne in mind that most of our concepts are subject to change during our entire life, that, at first, they are made only in a tentative way, that experience may show us, at any time, that they have been erroneously formed, that we have abstracted too little or too much, have made the class too wide or too narrow, or that here a quality must be added, or there one taken away. It is a good practice to make a memorandum of anything of which you may hear, but of which you know nothing, and then later to make a brief but thorough investigation of that thing by means of the dictionary and encyclopedia, and of whatever good works may be obtained on the subject, not leaving it until you feel that you have obtained at least a clear idea of what the thing really means. A half hour each morning devoted to exercise of this kind will result in a wonderful increase of general information. We have heard of a man who made a practice of reading a short article in the encyclopedia every evening, giving reference to subjects generally classed as familiar. In a year he made a noticeable advance in general knowledge as well as habits of thought. In 5 years he was looked upon by his associates as a man of a remarkably large field of general information, and of more than ordinary intelligence, which verdict was a just one. As a rule we waste far more time on worthless fiction than we are willing to devote to a little self-improvement of this kind. We shrink at the idea of a general course of instructive reading, little realizing that we can take our study in small instalments and at a very little cost in time or labor. Our concepts form the material which our intellect uses in its reasoning processes. No matter how good a reasoner one may be, unless he has a good supply of general information about the things of which he is reasoning, he will not make much real headway. We must begin at the bottom and build a firm foundation upon which the intellectual structure may be erected. This foundation is composed of facts. These facts are represented by our clear and correct concepts. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. Judgments. We have seen the several steps of the mental process whereby simple sensations are transformed into percepts and then into concepts or general ideas. The formation of the concept is considered as the first great step in thinking. The second great step in thinking is that of the formation of the judgment. The definition of judgment, as the term is used in logic, is the comparing together in the mind of two ideas of things and determining whether they agree or disagree with each other, or that one of them does or does not belong to the other. Judgment is, therefore, A. affirmative, or B. negative, as A. snow is white, or B. All white men are not Europeans. What in logic is called a proposition is the expression in words of a logical judgment. Hislop defined the term proposition as follows: any affirmation or denial of an agreement between two conceptions. For instance, we compare the concepts sparrow and bird, and find that there is an agreement, and that the former belongs to the latter. This mental process is a judgment. We then announce the judgment in the proposition, "The sparrow is a bird." In the same way we compare the concepts bat and bird, find that there is a disagreement, and form the judgment that neither belongs to the other, which we express in the proposition, "The bat is not a bird." Or we may form the judgment that sweetness is a quality of sugar, which we express in the proposition, "Sugar is sweet." Likewise we may form the judgment which results in the proposition, "Vinegar is not sweet." While the process of judgment is generally considered as constituting the second great step of thinking, coming after the formation of the concept, and consisting of the comparing of concepts, it must be remembered that the act of judging is far more elementary than this, for it is found still farther back in the history of thought processes. By that peculiar law of paradox, which we find everywhere operative in mind processes, the same process of forming judgments which has been used in comparing concepts has also been used in forming the same concepts in the stage of comparison. In fact, the result of all comparison, high or low, must be a judgment. Halleck says, "Judgment is necessary in forming concepts. When we decide that a quality is or is not common to a class, we are really judging. This is another evidence of the complexity and unified action of the mind." Brooks says, "The power of judgment is of very great value in its products. It is involved in or accompanies every act of the intellect, and thus lies at the foundation of all intellectual activity. It operates directly in every act of the understanding, and even aids the other faculties of the mind in completing their activities and products. Strictly speaking, every intelligent act of the mind is accompanied with a judgment. To know is to discriminate, and therefore to judge. Every sensation or cognition involves a knowledge and so a judgment that it exists. The mind cannot think without judging. To think is to judge. Even in forming the notions which judgment compares, the mind judges. Every notion or concept implies a previous act of judgment to form it. In forming a concept, we compare the common attributes before we unite them, and comparison is judgment. It is thus true that every concept is a contracted judgment, every judgment an expanded concept. It is needless to say that as judgments lie at the base of our thinking, and also appear in every part of its higher structure, the importance of correct judgment in thought cannot be overestimated. But it is often very difficult to form correct judgment even regarding the most familiar things around us. Halleck says, "In actual life things present themselves to us with their qualities disguised or obscured by other conflicting qualities. Men had for ages seen burning substances and had formed a concept of them. A certain hard, black, stony substance had often been noticed, and a concept had been formed of it. This concept was imperfect, but it is very seldom that we meet with perfect, sharply defined concepts in actual life. So it happened that for ages the concept of burning substance was never linked by judgment to the concept of stone coal. The combustible quality in the coal was overshadowed by its stony attributes. Of course stone will not burn, people said. One cannot tell how long the development of mankind was retarded for that very reason. England would not today be manufacturing products for the rest of the world had not someone judged coal to be a combustible substance. Judgment is ever silently working and comparing things that to past ages seemed dissimilar, and it is constantly abstracting and leaving out of the field of view those qualities which have simply served to obscure the point at issue. Gordy says, "The credulity of children is proverbial, but But if we get our facts at first hand, if we study the living, learning, playing child, we shall see that he is quite as remarkable for incredulity as for credulity. The explanation is simple. He tends to believe the first suggestion that comes into his mind, no matter from what source. And since his belief is not the result of any rational process, he cannot be made to disbelieve it in any rational way. Hence it is that he is very credulous about any matter about which he has no ideas. But let the idea once get possession of his mind, and he is quite as remarkable for incredulity as before for credulity. If we study the larger child, the man with the child's mind, an uneducated man, we shall have the same truth forced upon us. If the beliefs of men were due to processes of reasoning, where they have not reasoned, they would not believe. But do we find it so? Is it not true that the men who have the most positive opinions on the largest variety of subjects, so far as they have ever heard of them, are precisely those who have the least right to them? Socrates, we remember, was counted the wisest man in Athens because he alone resisted his natural tendency to believe in the absence of evidence. He alone would not delude himself with the conceit of knowledge without the reality. And it would scarcely be too much to say that the intellectual strength of men is in direct proportion to the number of things they are absolutely certain of. I do not, of course, mean to intimate that we should have no opinions about matters that we have not personally investigated. We take, and ought to take, the opinion of some men about law, and others about medicine, and others about particular sciences, and so on. But we should clearly realize the difference between holding an opinion on trust and holding it as a result of our own investigations. Brooks says, "It should be one of the leading objects of the culture of young people to lead them to acquire the habit of forming judgments. They should not only be led to see things, but to have opinions about things. They should be trained to see things in their relations, and to put these relations into definite propositions. Their ideas of objects should be worked up into thoughts concerning the objects. Those methods of teaching are best which tend to excite a thoughtful habit of mind that notices the similitudes and diversities of objects and endeavours to read the thoughts which they embody and of which they are the symbols. The study of logic, geometry, and the natural sciences is recommended for exercise of the faculty of judgment and the development thereof. The study and practice of even the lower branches of mathematics are also helpful in this direction. The game of checkers or chess is recommended by many authorities. Some have advocated the practice of solving enigmas, problems, rebuses, etc., as giving exercise to this faculty of the mind. The cultivation of the why attitude of mind, and the answering of one's own mental questions, is also helpful, if not carried to excess. Doubting Thomas is not always a term of reproach in these days of scientific habits of thought, and the man from Missouri has many warm admirers. End of chapter 23. End of section 10. Chapter 24. Primary Laws of Thought. In connection with this subject, we herewith call the attention of the student to the well-known primary laws of thought, which have been recognized as valid from the time of the ancient Greek logicians. These laws are self-evident and are uncontradictable. They are axiomatic. Jevons says of them, "Students are seldom able to see at first their full meaning and importance. All arguments may be explained when these self-evident laws are granted, and it is not too much to say that the whole of logic will be plain to those who will constantly use these laws as their key. Here are the three primary laws of thought. 1. Law of identity. Whatever is, is. 2. Law of contradiction. Nothing can both be and not be. 3. Law of excluded middle. Everything must either be or not be. There is no middle course. 1. The first of these laws, called the law of identity, informs us that a thing is always itself, no matter under what guise or form it is perceived or may present itself. An animal is always a bird if it possesses the general characteristics of a bird, no matter whether it exhibits the minor characteristics of an eagle, a wren, a stork, or a humming-bird. In the same way, a whale is a mammal because it possesses the general characteristics of a mammal, notwithstanding that it swims in the water like a fish. Also, sweetness is always sweetness, whether manifested in sugar, honey, flowers, or products of coal tar. If a thing is that thing, then it is, and it cannot be logically claimed that it is not. 2. The second of these laws, called the law of contradiction, informs us that the same quality or class cannot be both affirmed and denied of a thing at the same time and place. A sparrow cannot be said to be both bird and not bird at the same time. Neither can sugar be said to be sweet and not sweet at the same time. A piece of iron may be hot at one end and not hot at another, but it cannot be both hot and not hot at the same place at the same time. 3. The third of these laws, called the law of excluded middle, informs us that a given quality or class must be affirmed or denied to everything at any given time and place. Everything either must be of a certain class or not, must possess a certain quality or not, at a given time or place. There is no alternative or middle course. It is axiomatic that any statement must either be or not be true of any certain other thing at any certain time and place. There is no escape from this. Anything either must be black or not black, a bird or not a bird, alive or not alive, at any certain time or place. There is nothing else that it can be. It cannot both be and not be at the same time and place, as we have seen. Therefore, it must either be or not be that which is asserted of it. The judgment must decide which alternative, but it has only two possible choices. But the student must not confuse opposite qualities or things with notness. A thing may be black or not black, but it need not be white to be not black, for blue is likewise not black, just as it is not white. The neglect of this fact frequently causes error. We must always affirm either the existence or non-existence of a quality in a thing, but this is far different from affirming or denying the existence of the opposite quality. Thus a thing may be not hard, and yet it does not follow that it is soft. It may be neither hard nor soft. Fallacious application. There exists what are known as fallacies of application of these primary laws. A fallacy is an unsound argument or conclusion. For instance, because a particular man is found to be a liar, it is fallacious to assume that all men are liars, for lying is a particular quality of the individual man, and not a general quality of the family of men. In the same way, because a stork has long legs and a long bill, it does not follow that all birds must have these characteristics simply because the stork is a bird. It is fallacious to extend an individual quality to a class. But it is sound judgment to assume that a class quality must be possessed by all individuals in that class. It is a far different proposition which asserts that some birds are black from that which asserts that all birds are black. The same rule, of course, is true regarding negative propositions. Another fallacy is that which assumes that because the affirmative or negative proposition has not been, or cannot be proved, it follows that the opposite proposition must be true. The true judgment is simply not proven. Another fallacious judgment is that which is based on attributing absolute quality to that which is but relative or comparative. For instance, the terms hot and cold are relative and comparative, and simply denote one's relative opinion regarding a fixed and certain degree of temperature. The certain thing is the degree of temperature, say 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Of this we may logically claim that it is or is not true at a certain time and place. It either is 75 degrees Fahrenheit or it is not. But to one man this may seem warm and to another cold. Both are right in their judgments as far as their own relative feelings are concerned, but neither can claim absolutely that it is warm or cold. Therefore it is a fallacy to ascribe absolute quality to a relative one. The absolute fact comes under the law of excluded middle, but a personal opinion is not an absolute fact. There are other fallacies which will be considered in other chapters of this book under their appropriate heading. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25. Reasoning. Reasoning, the third great step in thinking, may be said to consist of ascertaining new truths from old ones, new judgments from old ones, unknown facts from known ones; in short, of proceeding logically from the known to the unknown, using the known as a foundation for the unknown which is sought to be known. Gordy gives us the following excellent definition of the term. Reasoning is the act of going from the known to the unknown through other beliefs, of basing judgment upon judgments, reaching beliefs through beliefs. Reasoning, then, is seen to be a process of building a structure of judgments, one resting upon the other, the topmost point being the final judgment, but the whole constituting an edifice of judgment. This may be seen more clearly when the various forms of reasoning are considered. Immediate reasoning. The simplest form of reasoning is that known as immediate reasoning, by which is meant reasoning by directly comparing two judgments without the intervention of the third judgment, which is found in the more formal classes of reasoning. This form of reasoning depends largely upon the application of the three primary laws of thought, to which we have referred in a previous chapter. It will be seen that if A, a thing is always itself, then B, all that is included in it, must partake of its nature. Thus the bird family has certain class characteristics. Therefore, by intermediate reasoning, we know that any member of that family must possess those class characteristics, whatever particular characteristics it may have in addition. And we likewise know that we cannot attribute these particular characteristics as a matter of course to the other members of the class. Thus, though all sparrows are birds, it is not true that all birds are sparrows. All biscuits are bread, but all bread is not biscuit. In the same way, we know that a thing cannot be bird and mammal at the same time, for mammals form a not-bird family. And likewise, we know that everything must be either bird or not bird, but that being not bird does not mean being a mammal, for there are many other not bird things than mammals. In this form of reasoning, distinction is always made between the universal or general class, which is expressed by the word all, and the particular or individual, which is expressed by the word some. Many persons fail to note this difference in their reasoning, and fallaciously reason, for instance, that because some swans are white, all swans must be so, which is a far different thing from reasoning that if all is so and so, then some must be so and so. Those who are interested in this subject are referred to some elementary textbook on logic, as the detailed consideration is too technical for consideration here. Reasoning by analogy. Reasoning by analogy is an elementary form of reasoning, and is a particular kind of reasoning employed by the majority of persons in ordinary thought. It is based upon the unconscious recognition by the human mind of the principle which is expressed by Jevons as, if two or more things resemble each other in many points, they will probably resemble each other in more points. The same authority says, reasoning by analogy differs only in degree from that type of reasoning called generalization. When many things resemble each other in a few properties, we argue about them by generalization. When a few things resemble each other in many properties, it is a case of analogy. While this form of reasoning is frequently employed with more or less satisfactory results, it is always open to a large percentage of error. Thus, persons have been poisoned by toadstools by reason of the false analogous reason that because mushrooms are edible, then toadstools, which resemble them, must be also fit for food, Or, in the same way, because certain berries resemble other edible berries, they must likewise be good food. As Brooks says, to infer that because John Smith has a red nose and is also a drunkard, then Henry Jones, who also has a red nose, is also a drunkard, would be dangerous inference. Conclusions of this kind, drawn from analogy, are frequently dangerous. Halleck says, "Many false analogies are manufactured, and it is excellent thought training to expose them. The majority of people think so little that they swallow these false analogies just as new-fledged robins swallow small stones dropped into their mouths." Jevons, one of the best authorities on the subject, says, "There is no way in which we can really assure ourselves that we are arguing safely by analogy. The only rule that can be given is this, that the more closely two things resemble each other, the more likely it is that they are the same in other respects, especially in points closely connected with those observed. In order to be clear about our conclusions, we ought, in fact, never to rest satisfied with mere analogy, but ought to try to discover the general laws governing the case. We find that reasoning by analogy is not to be depended upon, unless we make such an inquiry into the causes and laws of the things in question that we really employ inductive and deductive reasoning." Higher forms of reasoning. The two higher forms of reasoning are known respectively as 1. Inductive reasoning, or inference from particular facts to general laws, and 2. Deductive reasoning, or inference from general truths to particular truths. While the class distinction is made for the purpose of clear consideration, it must not be forgotten that the two forms of reasoning are generally found in combination. Thus, in inductive reasoning many steps are taken by the aid of deductive reasoning; and likewise, before we can reason deductively from general truths to particular ones, we must have discovered the general truths by inductive reasoning from particular facts. Thus there is a unity in all reasoning processes, as there is in all mental operations. Inductive reasoning is a synthetical process, deductive reasoning an analytical one. In the first we combine and build up, in the latter we dissect and separate. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26. Inductive Reasoning. Inductive reasoning is based upon the axiom, "What is true of the many is true of the whole." This axiom is based upon man's belief in the uniformity of nature. Inductive reasoning is a mental ladder by which we climb from particular facts to general laws, but the ladder rests upon the belief that the universe is governed by law. The steps in inductive reasoning are as follows: 1. Observation, investigation, and examination of particular facts or things. If we wish to know the general characteristics of the bird family, we must first examine a sufficient number of birds of many kinds so as to discover the comparatively few general characteristics possessed by all of the bird family, as distinct from the particular characteristics possessed by only some of that family. The greater the number of individuals examined, the narrower becomes our list of the general qualities common to all. In the same way we must examine many kinds of flowers before we come to the few general qualities common to all flowers, which we combine in the general concept of flower. The same, of course, is true regarding the discovery of general laws from particular facts. We examine the facts and then work toward a general law which will explain them. For instance, the law of gravitation was discovered by the observation and investigation of the fact that all objects are attracted to the earth. Further investigation revealed the fact that all material objects are attracted to each other. Then the general law was discovered, or rather, the hypothesis was advanced, was found to explain the facts, and was verified by further experiments and observation. 2. The second step in inductive reasoning is the making of an hypothesis. An hypothesis is a proposition or principle assumed as a possible explanation for a set or class of facts. It is regarded as a working theory, which must be examined and tested in connection with the facts before it is finally accepted. For instance, after the observation that a number of magnets attracted steel, it was found reasonable to advance the hypothesis that all magnets attract steel. In the same way was advanced the hypothesis that all birds are warm-blooded, winged, feathered, oviparous vertebrates. Subsequent observation and experiment established the hypothesis regarding the magnet and regarding the general qualities of the bird family. If a single magnet had been found which did not attract steel, then the hypothesis would have fallen. If a single bird had been discovered which was not warm-blooded, then that quality would have been stricken from the list of the necessary characteristics of all birds. A theory is merely an hypothesis which has been verified or established by continued and repeated observation, investigation, and experiment. Hypotheses and theories arise very generally from the subconscious assimilation of a number of particular facts and the conscious flashing of a great guess or a sacred suspicion of the truth into the conscious field of attention. The scientific imagination plays an important part in this process. There is, of course, a world of difference between a blind guess based upon insufficient data and a scientific guess resulting from the accumulation of a vast store of careful and accurate information. As Brooks says, the forming of an hypothesis requires a suggestive mind, a lively fancy, a philosophic imagination that catches a glimpse of the idea through the form or sees the law standing behind the fact. But accepted theories, in the majority of cases, arise only by testing out and rejecting many promising hypotheses and finally settling upon the one which best answers all the requirements and best explains the facts. As an authority says, to try wrong guesses is with most persons the only way to hit upon right ones. 3. Testing the hypothesis by deductive reasoning is the third step in inductive reasoning. This test is made by applying a hypothetical principle to particular facts or things, that is, to follow out mentally the hypothetical principle to its logical conclusion. This may be done in this way. If so and so is correct, then it follows that thus and so is true, etc. If the conclusion agrees with reason, then the test is deemed satisfactory so far as it has gone. But if the result proves to be a logical absurdity or inconsistent with natural facts, then the hypothesis is discredited. 4. Practical verification of the hypothesis is the fourth step in inductive reasoning. This step consists of the actual comparison of observed facts with the logical conclusions arising from applying deductive reasoning to the general principle assumed as a premise. The greater number of facts agreeing with the conclusions arising from the premise of the hypothesis, the greater is deemed the probability of the latter. The authorities generally assume an hypothesis to be verified when it accounts for all the facts which properly are related to it. Some extremists contend, however, that before an hypothesis may be considered as absolutely verified, it must not only account for all the associated facts, but that also there must be no other possible hypothesis to account for the same facts. The facts referred to in this connection may be either 1. Observed phenomena, or 2. The conclusions of deductive reasoning arising from the assumption of the hypothesis, or 3. The agreement between the observed facts and the logical conclusions. The last combination is generally regarded as the most logical. The verification of an hypothesis must be an all-around one, and there must be an agreement between the observed facts and the logical conclusions in the case. The hypothesis must fit the facts, and the facts must fit the hypothesis. The facts are the glass slipper of the Cinderella legend. The several sisters of Cinderella were discarded hypotheses, the slipper and the sisters not fitting. When Cinderella's foot was found to be the one foot upon which the glass slipper fitted, then the Cinderella hypothesis was considered to have been proved. The glass slipper was hers, and the prince claimed his bride. End of chapter 26. End of section 11. Chapter 27. Deductive Reasoning. We have seen in the preceding chapter that from particular facts we reason inductively to general principles or truths. We have also seen that one of the steps of inductive reasoning is the testing of the hypothesis by deductive reasoning. We shall now also see that the results of inductive reasoning are used as premises or bases for deductive reasoning. These two forms of reasoning are opposites, and yet complementary to each other. They are, in a sense, independent, and yet are interdependent. Brooks says, "The two methods of reasoning are the reverse of each other. One goes from particulars to generals, the other from generals to particulars. One is a process of analysis, the other is a process of synthesis. One rises from facts to laws, the other descends from laws to facts. Each is independent of the other, and each is a valid and essential method of inference." Halleck well expresses the spirit of deductive reasoning as follows. After induction has classified certain phenomena and thus given us a major premise, we may proceed deductively to apply the inference to any new specimen that can be shown to belong to that class. Induction hands over to deduction a ready-made premise. Deduction takes that as a fact, making no inquiry regarding its truth. Only after general laws have been laid down, after objects have been classified, after major premises have been formed, can deduction be employed. Deductive reasoning proceeds from general principles to particular facts. It is a descending process, analytical in its nature. It rests upon the fundamental axiomatic basis that whatever is true of the whole is true of its parts, or whatever is true of the universal is true of the particulars. The process of deductive reasoning may be stated briefly as follows. 1. A general principle of a class is stated as a major premise. 2. A particular thing is stated as belonging to that general class, this statement being the minor premise. Therefore, 3. The general class principle is held to apply to the particular thing, this last statement being the conclusion. A premise is a proposition assumed to be true. The following gives us an illustration of the above process. 1. Major premise. A bird is a warm-blooded, feathered, winged, oviparous vertebrate. 2. Minor premise. The sparrow is a bird, therefore 3. Conclusion. The sparrow is a warm-blooded, feathered, winged, oviparous vertebrate. Or again, 1. Major premise. Rattlesnakes frequently bite when enraged, and their bite is poisonous. 2. Minor premise. This snake before me is a rattlesnake. Therefore, 3. Conclusion. This snake before me may bite when enraged, and its bite will be poisonous. The average person may be inclined to object that he is not conscious of going through this complicated process when he reasons about sparrows or rattlesnakes, but he does nevertheless. He is not conscious of the steps because mental habit has accustomed him to the process, and it is performed more or less automatically. But these 3 steps manifest in all processes of deductive reasoning, even the simplest. The average person is like the character in the French play who was surprised to learn that he had been talking prose for 40 years without knowing it. Jevons says that the majority of persons are equally surprised when they find out that they have been using logical forms, more or less correctly, without having realized it. He says, "A large number even of educated persons have no clear idea of what logic is. Yet, in a certain way, everyone must have been a logician since he began to speak." There are many technical rules and principles of logic which we cannot attempt to consider here. There are, however, a few elementary principles of correct reasoning which should have a place here. What is known as a syllogism is the expression in words of the various parts of the complete process of reasoning or argument. Whately defines it as follows: "A syllogism is an argument expressed in strict logical form so that its conclusiveness is manifest from the structure of the expression alone, without any regard to the meaning of the term. In short, if the two premises are accepted as correct, it follows that there can be only one true logical conclusion resulting therefrom. In abstract or theoretical reasoning, the word 'if' is assumed to precede each of the two premises, the 'therefore' before the conclusion resulting from the 'if,' of course." The following are the general rules governing the syllogism. 1. Every syllogism must consist of 3, and no more than 3, propositions, namely 1. The major premise, 2. The minor premise, and 3. The conclusion. 2. The conclusion must naturally follow from the premises, otherwise the syllogism is invalid and constitutes a fallacy or sophism. 3. One premise, at least, must be affirmative. 4. If one premise is negative, the conclusion must be negative. 5. One premise, at least, must be universal or general. 6. If one premise is particular, the conclusion also must be particular. The last two rules, 5 and 6, contain the essential principles of all the rules regarding syllogisms, and any syllogism which breaks them will be found also to break other rules, some of which are not stated here for the reason that they are too technical. These two rules may be tested by constructing syllogisms in violation of their principles. The reason for them is as follows. Rule 5. Because from two particular premises no conclusion can be drawn, as for instance, 1. Some men are mortal, 2. John is a man, we cannot reason from this either that John is or is not mortal. The major premise should read all men. Rule 6. Because a universal conclusion can be drawn only from two universal premises, an example being needless here, as the conclusion is so obvious. Cultivation of reasoning faculties. There is no royal road to the cultivation of the reasoning faculties. There is but the old familiar rule: practice, exercise, use. Nevertheless, there are certain studies which tend to develop the faculties in question. The study of arithmetic, especially mental arithmetic, tends to develop correct habits of reasoning from one truth to another, from cause to effect. Better still is the study of geometry, and best of all, of course, is the study of logic and the practice of working out its problems and examples. The study of philosophy and psychology also is useful in this way. Many lawyers and teachers have drilled themselves in geometry solely for the purpose of developing their logical reasoning powers. Brooks says, "So valuable is geometry as a discipline that many lawyers and others review their geometry every year in order to keep the mind drilled to logical habits of thinking. The study of logic will aid in the development of the power of deductive reasoning. It does this, first, by showing the method by which we reason. To know how we reason, to see the laws which govern the reasoning process, to analyze the syllogism and see its conformity to the laws of thought, is not only an exercise of reasoning, but gives that knowledge of the process that will be both a stimulus and a guide to thought. No one can trace the principles and processes of thought without receiving thereby an impetus to thought. In the second place, the study of logic is probably even more valuable because it gives practice in deductive thinking. This, perhaps, is its principal value, since the mind reasons instinctively without knowing how it reasons. One can think without the knowledge of the science of thinking, just as one can use language correctly without a knowledge of grammar. Yet as the study of grammar improves one's speech, so the study of logic can but improve one's thought. In the opinion of the writer hereof, one of the best, though simple, methods of cultivating the faculties of reasoning is to acquaint oneself thoroughly with the more common fallacies or forms of false reasoning, so thoroughly that not only is the false reasoning detected at once, but also the reason of its falsity is readily understood. To understand the wrong ways of reasoning is to be on guard against them. By guarding against them, we tend to eliminate them from our thought processes. If we eliminate the false, we have the true left in its place. Therefore, we recommend the weeding of the logical garden of the common fallacies, to the end that the flowers of pure reason may flourish in their stead. Accordingly, we think it well to call to your attention in the next chapter to the more common fallacies and the reason of their falsity. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28. Fallacious Reasoning. A fallacy is defined as an unsound argument or mode of arguing which, while appearing to be decisive of a question, is in reality not so, or a fallacious statement or proposition in which the error is not readily apparent. When a fallacy is used to deceive others, it is called sophistry. It is important that the student should understand the nature of the fallacy and understand its most common forms. As Jevons says, "In learning how to do right, it is always desirable to be informed as to the ways in which we are likely to go wrong. In describing to a man the road which he should follow, we ought to tell him not only the turnings which he is to take, but also the turnings which he is to avoid." Similarly, it is a useful part of logic which teaches us the ways and turnings by which people most commonly go astray in reasoning. In presenting the following brief statement regarding the more common forms of fallacy, we omit, so far as possible, the technical details which belong to text books on logic. Fallacies. 1. True collective but false particular. An example of this fallacy is found in the argument that because the French race collectively are excitable, therefore a particular Frenchman must be excitable, or that because the Jewish race collectively are good business people, therefore the particular Jew must be a good business man. This is as fallacious as arguing that because a man may drown in the ocean, he should avoid the bath, basin, or cup of water. There is a vast difference between the whole of a thing and its separate parts. Nitric acid and glycerin, separately, are not explosive, but combined they form nitroglycerin, a most dangerous and powerful explosive. Reversing this form of illustration, we remind you of the old saying, "Salt is a good thing, but one doesn't want to be put in pickle." 2. Irrelevant conclusion. This fallacy consists in introducing in the conclusion matter not contained in the premises, or in the confusing of the issue. For instance, 1. All men are sinful. 2. John Smith is a man. Therefore, 3. John Smith is a horse thief. This may sound absurd, but many arguments are as fallacious as this, and for the same reason. Or another and more subtle form. 1. All thieves are liars. 2. John Smith is a liar. Therefore, 3. John Smith is a thief. The first example arises from the introduction of new matter, and the last from the confusion of the issue. 3. False cause. This fallacy consists in attributing cause to a thing which is merely coincident with or precedent to the effect. For instance, 1. The cock crows just before or at the moment of sunrise. Therefore, 2. The cock crowing is the cause of the sunrise. Or again, 1. Bad crops followed the election of a Whig president. Therefore, 2. The Whig party is the cause of the bad crops. Or again, 1. Where civilization is the highest, there we find the greatest number of high hats. Therefore, 2. High hats are the cause of civilization. 4. Circular reasoning. In this form of fallacy, the person reasoning or arguing endeavours to explain or prove a thing by itself or its own terms. For instance, 1. The Whig party is honest because it advocates honest principles. 2. The Whig principles are honest because they are advocated by an honest party. A common form of this fallacy, in its phase of sophistry, is the use of synonyms in such a manner that they seem to express more than the original conception, whereas they are really but other terms for the same thing. An historical example of circular reasoning is the following. 1. The Church of England is the true church because it was established by God. 2. It must have been established by God because it is the true church. This form of sophistry is most effective when employed in long arguments in which it is difficult to detect it. 5. Begging the question. This fallacy arises from the use of a false premise, or at least of a premise the truth of which is not admitted by the opponent. It may be stated, simply, as the unwarranted assumption of a premise, generally the major premise. Many persons in public life argue in this way. They boldly assert an unwarranted premise, and then proceed to argue logically from it. The result is confusing to the average person, for, the steps of reasoning being logical, it seems as if the argument is sound, the fact of the unwarranted premise being overlooked. The person using this form of sophistry proceeds on Aaron Burr's theory of truth being that which is boldly asserted and plausibly maintained. Bulwer makes one of his characters mention a particularly atrocious form of this fallacy, although an amusing one, in the following words: "Whenever you are about to utter something astonishingly false, always begin with 'It is an acknowledged fact,' etc." Sir Robert Filmer was a master of this manner of writing. Thus, with what a solemn face that great man attempted to cheat! He would say, "It is a truth undeniable that there cannot be any multitude of men whatsoever, either great or small," etc. "But in that same multitude there is one man among them that in nature hath a right to be king of all the rest, as being the next heir of Adam." Look carefully for the major premise of propositions advanced in argument, spoken or written. Be sure that the person making the proposition is not begging the question by the unwarranted assumption of the premise. General rule of inference. Hislop says, concerning valid inferences and fallacious ones, "We cannot infer anything we please from any premises we please. We must conform to certain definite rules or principles. Any violation of them will be a fallacy. There are two simple rules which should not be violated. 1. The subject matter in the conclusion should be of the same general kind as in the premises. 2. The facts constituting the premises must be accepted and must not be fictitious. A close observance of these rules will result in the detection and avoidance of the principal forms of fallacious reasoning and sophistry." Sophistical arguments. There are a number of tricky practices resorted to by persons in argument that are fallacious in intent and result, which we do not consider here in detail as they scarcely belong to the particular subject of this book. A brief mention, however, may be permitted in the interest of general information. Here are the principal ones. 1. Arguing that a proposition is correct because the opponent cannot prove the contrary. The fallacy is seen when we realize that the statement, "The moon is made of green cheese," is not proved because we cannot prove the contrary. No amount of failure to disprove a proposition really proves it, and no amount of failure to prove a proposition really disproves it. As a general rule, the burden of proof rests upon the person stating the proposition, and his opponent is not called upon to disprove it or else have it considered proved. The old cry of "you cannot prove that it is not so" is based upon a fallacious conception. 2. Abuse of the opponent, his party, or his cause. This is no real argument or reasoning. It is akin to proving a point by beating the opponent over the head. 3. Arguing that an opponent does not live up to his principles is no argument against the principles he advocates. A man may advocate the principle of temperance and yet drink to excess. This simply proves that he preaches better than he practices, but the truth of the principle of temperance is not affected in any way thereby. The proof of this is that he may change his practices, and it cannot be held that the change of his personal habits improves or changes the nature of the principle. 4. Argument of authority is not based on logic. Authority is valuable when really worthy, and merely as corroboration or adding weight, but it is not logical argument. The reasons of the authority alone constitute a real argument. The abuse of this form of argument is shown in the above reference to begging the question, in the quotation from Bulwer. 5. Appeal to prejudice or public opinion is not a valid argument, for public opinion is frequently wrong, and prejudice is often unwarranted, and, at the best, they have nothing to do with the case from the standpoint of logic. The abuse of testimony and claimed evidence is also worthy of examination, but we cannot go into the subject here. Fallacies of prejudice. But perhaps the most dangerous of all fallacies in the search for truth on the part of the most of us are those which arise from the following. 1. The tendency to reason from what we feel and wish to be true, rather than from the actual facts of the case, which causes us unconsciously to assume the mental attitude of if the facts agree with our likes and pet theories, all is well; if they do not, so much the worse for the facts. 2. The tendency in all of us to perceive only the facts that agree with our theories and to ignore the others. We find that for which we seek, and overlook that which does not interest us. Our discoveries follow our interest, and our interest follows our desires and beliefs. The intelligent man or woman realizes these tendencies of human nature and endeavours to avoid them in his or her own reasoning, but is keenly conscious of them in the arguments and reasoning of others. A failure to observe and guard one's self against these tendencies results in bigotry, intolerance, narrowness, and intellectual astigmatism. End of chapter 28. End of section 12.